Building bridges and not pedestals. This is the lesson of the unjust steward. Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. If we are honest with ourselves, every single one of us shares core human desires. We want to feel valued. We want to know that we belong to, that our voice matters, and that the people around us trust us. There is nothing wrong with wanting to be a source of strength for our families or our churches or our communities. But there is a very fine, subtle line between seeking to serve people and seeking to make ourselves indispensable. There's a parable that we're looking at today in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 16. That is the one most misunderstood stories that Jesus ever told. It's the parable of the unjust steward. The story, the way it starts, is with this manager who gets caught mismanaging his master's wealth, and he's about to get fired. And in that moment of crisis, instead of humbling himself, instead of just repenting, his immediate instinct is self preservation. He looks at his future and he says this: I'm not strong enough to dig any ditches, and I'm certainly too proud to beg. So what does he do? He goes behind the master's back and starts cutting these backdoor deals with everyone who owes the master some money. He slashes their debts, not out of generosity, but out of strategy. He thinks, if I make these people indebted to me, now then, when I get thrown out of his house, they'll owe me a favor and I'll have a place to stay. He was using people to secure his own future. He was building a network of obligation, using the master's resources to build a safety net for his own ego. So let's look at this: the trap of self elevation and spiritual pride. It's easy to read that story and start pointing fingers at the steward. But Jesus didn't give us this parable just to criticize an ancient manager. He gave it to us as a mirror. Because if we aren't careful, any one of us can fall into that exact same mindset. It happens whenever we feel insecure in our relationships or our standing. We start operating from fear instead of faith. And when fear takes the wheel, human nature tries to gain control. So how do we do that today? How do we do that today? Sometimes we do it by trying to elevate ourselves to a pedestal. We position ourselves as the only person who really, truly understands what's going on, the only person giving the right advice, and the only true source of spiritual wisdom in the room. So we start to subtly convince the people around us that everyone else's doctrine is flawed, everyone else's motives are suspect, and that we are the only safe harbor. And to keep ourselves on that pedestal, another dangerous thing happens. We start slowly chipping away at the reputations of others. We might cover it up in the spiritual language. We might call it concern or sharing a concern or warning people. But at the end of the day, tearing down another person's character just to make our own look stronger is just flat out plain manipulation. It's the strategy of the unjust steward, trying to rally people to our side by creating division, making sure that people depend on us rather than depending on God. Now, look at the master's accounting and the power of humility. Here is the quiet tragedy of that lifestyle. It is exhausting. When you build your identity on being the smartest, most spiritual, or most indispensable person in the room, you live in constant fear of being exposed because you know it ain't true. You constantly have to manage alliances. You constantly have to roll in the troops to make sure that you have a place to stay. Because deep down, the unjust steward knew the truth and accounting was coming. So in the parable, the master does eventually call for the books. And no matter how many side deals the steward made, no matter how many people he bribed or influenced, he couldn't change the fact that he had broken trust. Manipulation might buy a little temporary leverage, but it certainly destroys authentic relationship. You cannot build a genuine godly community on the foundation of tearing the other people down. Look at the contrast in Jesus. Now, Jesus had ultimate authority. You agree? He had the only pure doctrine. You agree? He had all the power in the universe, yet he never once used his position to pull political moves or secure his own ego. He didn't build a pedestal for himself either. He washed people's feet. He didn't demand that people look only to him as a gatekeeper of power. He pointed everyone straight to the Father. He built bridges of grace, not walls of division. So in our conclusion, I make this reflection. So as we reflect on this parable today, the question isn't just who is the unjust steward in our lives? The real question is, where am I tempted to act like him? When I talk about others, am I building them up or am I quietly trying to make myself look better by comparison? Am I pointing people to Christ or am I trying to tie them to me? Am I leading with humility or am I operating out of fear and control? Brothers and sisters, listen, we don't need to play political games to have a place in God's family. We don't need to tear down someone else's house to secure our own standing either. God's grace is big enough. His truth is clear enough, and his love is secure enough for all of us. So may we be found faithful stewards, not managers of our own reputations, but humble servants of God's love. Let's lay down the need to control. Let's lay down the need to be elevated and choose instead to walk together in truth, grace, and unity. Thank you all again for allowing me into your space. And, I've always marveled about this parable and I always wondered why Jesus at the end of this parable says that the children of this world are more shrewd than the children of light. And I understand, that what we do in our human nature is not spiritual. It is a human nature. So I thank you again for allowing me into your space, and I pray that the grace and the mercy of God continue to reign in your life. And in the immortal words of Brother Josh Stafford, as long as the blood is running warm in your veins, you do have an opportunity to change. And I faithfully submit that to you. And until next time, Lord willing, God bless you. Amen.